Hey, it's John. This video is going to be about the chocolate truffles we made past couple days, last week I think actually. The bag of chocolate I used was Ghirardelli, 60% cacao, bittersweet. I'll send a picture up here. Use that a lot. I buy those when they're on sale. I buy a whole stack of them. And those are the chocolate chips that we like the most in cookies and for other baking things. The bag was about $4.40, and I ended up making 8 truffles out of it, so about 50 cents a piece. It was a 10-ounce bag. I used half of it for the filling. I used half of it for the shell. And the end result was I used a whole bag altogether. When I mixed the inside, and I think we did this during class, I put half a bag, so about 5 ounces of the 60% chocolate in. And I added about 2 or 3 tablespoons of cream. It didn't seem like, maybe it was, I was trying to put just barely enough, and spread it out on a silpat, and put it in the fridge. So by the end of class, I could roll up with a spoon and it would curl up just like you talked about doing in class. I thought it worked really well. I rolled balls. I did some little ones, the smallest ones were maybe, or the biggest ones were probably ping pong by size. And then a few of them were a little bit smaller than that. To temper the chocolate for the shell, I put those on the silpat and put them in the fridge overnight to set. The next day, I got out my sous vide equipment. I wanted to be able to control the temperature and hold it, so that worked out really well for me. I sealed the chocolate in the bag, put it in water at 120, left it in there for quite a while till it got nice and soft. Used a pastry scraper or a bowl scraper to kind of move it and massage it a little bit. Then I had a second bowl that I started off with warm water and got it to about 80 degrees, and then I just used a instant thermometer, and I would check it. So I stuck the bag in there, again massaged it around, left it in there for probably 15 minutes or so. Massaged it every couple minutes just to mix it around and make sure everything was getting to all be the same temperature. In the meantime, I was adjusting the pot that had the hot water in it from 120 down to 90. So I added some ice. I had to dump some of the water out and added some ice, got it to just about 90. And once it stabilized, I moved the chocolate back into there. Again, massaged, scraped it with the pastry, the bowl scraper. And at that point, I felt like it was tempered. I was ready to coat my truffles. So I got them out of the fridge. I did a combination of pouring, squeezing out of the bag. I dried off the bag really well, so I didn't get any water mixed in with the chocolate. I used 2 different towels and dried it off once, and then used another dry towel and dried it off a second time. I got it out, I squeezed it in. I used a combination of a spoon and pouring it over to try to coat each one of those. Again, sit them down on a silpat on a cookie sheet. And then I used a variety of different things. I put some flaky salt on top. I put some little red beads. I put some sugar crystals, powdered sugar, cocoa powder. I left one plain. My son doesn't like stuff on his chocolate. He likes it simple and pure. Let's see. So then I set them out in the garage. It seemed like the refrigerator was going to be too cold and the house was too warm. So I put them in the garage. It was 55, 58 degrees, something like that, which I believe I read was kind of an ideal temperature for setting. So the garage worked out really well that day. It didn't take long. The outside got nice and hard, had a nice sheen to it. Got very crispy. Looked really dark chocolate. When you take a bite in it, the outside would crack, like a fresh, crisp, almost like a cookie crack. Had a nice snap to it. And then when you get to the inside, suddenly it was nice and creamy and smooth all the way through. All in all, going down the criteria here, let's see, the flavor, not very sweet. I mean, I used that bittersweet and I didn't add any extra sugar to anything. I did put powdered sugar on the outside and the crystal sugar and some little red beads. It's my homage to the coronavirus truffle. I don't know, it seemed like something to do. You can see, I'll send a picture up here. But those added a little bit of sweetness, which was nice because on their own, these were really very, very rich, very chocolatey. So kind of almost hard to eat. None of us ate a whole one at a sitting. We would take a bite or two and set them down. And they were only, like I said, ping pong ball size at the most. But we'd take a bite and set them down. And that was pretty much the end of those. The texture, again, the outside was moderately thin, but very crispy, very dark chocolate. And then the inside was more creamy and smooth. So it was a nice contrast. Maybe a tiny bit of vanilla, but I didn't get a whole lot of that. I'm thinking next time maybe I'll put a little bit of vanilla on the inside. That might add a little more contrast to it. The chocolate on the outside was very dark, and the chocolate on the inside was, I don't want to say closer to a milk chocolate, but kind of approaching that lighter, smoother chocolate. Nothing tasted greasy. Everything had a great mouthfeel. It was just so overpoweringly rich you couldn't eat much. Personally, I liked them. I think I can work on my aesthetics of them to make them look nicer, but flavor-wise, I thought they were pretty spot on. And my favorite one had the flaky salt on it. I really thought it turned out really well. I kind of want to do one with a little bit of cayenne. I think the contrast and maybe a little bit of sugar or vanilla on the inside. So I think the contrast between the vanilla and the cream on the inside and the cayenne on the outside might be really fun. Or switch around and do it the other way. Put sugar on the outside and add cayenne to the chocolate on the inside. So next time I'll try that. I'm going to pause for a second and come back, and then I'll run through all the questions and see how the answers to those questions related to these truffles. Okay, so I'm going to answer the questions on pages 418 and 419. Cocoa nib, roasted. The seeds inside are roasted and chopped, not ground yet. What changes occur as they're roasted? I think the shell gets loosened. They lose some moisture, so they dry up a little bit, become easier to work with. Kills microorganisms. The flavor changes. The dark color gets darker. That Maillard reaction has the sugar and the carbs in the presence of proteins heated, so you have that Maillard reaction, which gets darker, more complex flavors. I think the flavor becomes much more complex, I guess, is the flavor that you're looking for. And depending on how much they roast it, what kind of beans they are, they try to optimize that for different types of beans to get the optimum flavor without evaporating too much of the essential flavors. What's the difference in makeup between unsweetened chocolate and natural cocoa? I think unsweetened chocolate is the nibs ground, and in the process that some of that liqueur can drip away, and you're left with more dry solids and very little liqueur, and that's what becomes cocoa powder. So the unsweetened chocolate would have more percentage-wise cocoa butter, and since it's cocoa butter at room temperature, it would turn very hard solid, and the natural cocoa tends to be a powder product, which would be used in unsweetened chocolate or cocoa for the richest, most chocolate flavor in baked goods. No question, unsweetened chocolate is a much higher percentage of cocoa butter, much more rounded flavor, which should be used in low fat because there's less butter in the cocoa powder. That would be a more low fat product. How is Dutch chocolate made? Dutch cocoa, alkalis added. Chocolate tends to be naturally acidic, so it balances that acidity. The flavor can smooth out a little bit. The color can turn hints of red, but you get a little more of a mellower flavor, and that acidity, that astringency that you get from the naturally acidic chocolate diminishes. What's another name for semi-sweet chocolate? Some places dark chocolate, some places bittersweet, and apparently some places just chocolate. So that's just what they call it. How does milk chocolate compare to bittersweet from the minimum percentage? If I read this right, the U.S. does not have minimum percentage for those. Canada does. For Canada, bittersweet's 35%, milk chocolate is 25%. We only have requirements for how much total cocoa is in them, not how much cocoa solids. So that meant that can include liqueur and butter and solids altogether. What does the amount of cocoa butter and chocolates and couvertures affect their property? This gets into, we're going to kind of use the same answer and the same thing for a lot of the same qualities for a lot of these questions down here. So for 16 through maybe 22, the higher tempered properly and more cocoa butter, you're going to get a better snap. You're going to get a darker color. You're going to get a richer flavor, and you're going to get that great melting characteristic that chocolate has, where it's solid at room temperature and it melts at just under body temperature. So you put it in your mouth, it melts right away. There's no greasiness. There's very little greasiness, I guess. It's a nice, rich flavor that dissolves and swallows, has a great mouthfeel to it. Why must chocolate be tempered when it cools? If you don't do that, you lose those exact characteristics we just talked about. It can become dull. It can bloom, which can get that white surface on the outside, which becomes unpleasant to look at. It tastes chalky. It just looks weird. And it has a texture that no longer snaps, but is just kind of soft and bends and can start turning crumbly. What's the main difference between alpha, beta, and beta prime crystals? So the alpha crystals melt at a much lower temperature. Those are, we'll say, undesirable for final chocolate products. The beta crystals are the ones that have the dark color, the nice snap crisp, and the great melting properties. So when you're tempering, which is going down into, what's the goal of tempering, 22, you are trying to melt and get rid of effectively those alpha and turn them into, by tempering at the correct temperatures and by seating it properly, to create more beta crystals so that you get that snap, you get that dark color, and you get that great mouthfeel. How does cocoa butter compare to all-purpose shortening? About half of the shortening and tendering properties that shortening does. What changes occur to white chocolate when it's stored too long? The white can start to turn dark. The product can naturally, the Maillard reaction can naturally occur, and it can lose some of the color. It can also oxidize and turn rancid. And what is fat bloom? Hang on. All right, my wife just knocked on the door. Fat bloom is kind of that white, powdery looking stuff that happens, that collects on the outside of chocolate if it's not tempered correctly. So it needs to be tempered correctly. It needs to be stored at the correct temperature. We have a habit at our house of leaving a box of chocolate chips in one of the cupboards that has a light underneath it. It gets warm. They tend to melt. They get a strange look on the outside, which I'm sure is this fat bloom. It doesn't affect it baking-wise. It just affects the appearance of a product. So to prevent that from happening in a final product, you certainly want to temper it correctly. The last thing I'm going to show is I did start the vanilla extract. So I'm going to show you the bottle of vodka that I used, and then show you the beans I cut up. I followed the directions on one of the videos and chopped up my vanilla beans into little pieces. And so I have a 1.5 liter bottle with 6 whole vanilla beans stuck in it. So I'll show you what it looked like right when I put it in, and then here we are 1 day later, and you can see what it's done in 1 day. So I'll show you that. There you go. It's starting to turn colors already.